Today, we're diving deep into the life of one of early Islam's most powerful and complex figures, Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is a story about a man whose passion was so intense it could feel like a force of nature, and how that very same intensity was shaped by divine wisdom into a legacy that honestly changed the course of history.
To really understand Umar, you have to picture where he came from. Think about Mecca. We're talking about a valley surrounded by stark, rugged mountains, all under this brilliant, unforgiving sun. It was in this very crucible that a new, divine message began to grow, forging a people of incredible resilience and conviction.
And from this very landscape emerges a man who seems like he was carved from those mountains himself, Umar ibn al-Khattab. His personality was just as strong, just as uncompromising. And his zeal, his passion for what he believed in, well, that would become the stuff of legend.
So how are we going to explore a figure this monumental? We've broken down his journey into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at that raw, powerful will of his, forged right there in Mecca. Then, we'll see how he learned to balance his intense sense of justice with mercy. We'll watch him stand firm during storms that would have broken anyone else. Then, and this is fascinating, we'll see his side as a humble and devoted student. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together in this incredible legacy of submission to a wisdom far greater than his own.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, in Mecca. This is where we see Omar's character in its purest, most unfiltered form. He was fierce, he was all in, and he was completely dedicated to his side. For him, there were no gray areas. I mean, just listen to this. This quote tells you everything you need to know about his early intensity. When a key opponent asked for a favor, this was Umar's answer. It's not just a no, it's a declaration of total war, a line drawn in the sand. It shows you a man whose loyalty was absolute, and his opposition was just as fierce.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. That fiery will wasn't meant to just run wild. The next chapter of his life is all about how that raw power was refined. Think of his passion for justice as the raw material. It was the deep wisdom and mercy of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that would shape and temper that fire into a tool for true, balanced leadership.
And this brings us to a huge question, right? It's something leaders have struggled with forever. The story we're about to get into tackles this head-on. How do you enforce the rules and maintain justice without totally losing sight of forgiveness and a person's potential for redemption?
So picture this. The community is preparing for a major move, and suddenly they make a shocking discovery. A secret letter, filled with sensitive information, is found on its way to the enemy. It's treason, plain and simple. And the person who sent it? Unthinkable. It's Khattab, a respected veteran from the Battle of Badr. The sense of betrayal must have been just immense.
And boom, here comes Umar's reaction. It's pure, uncut, protective zeal. In his mind, it's simple. A crime was committed, the community is in danger, and the punishment needs to be fast and final. He sees a threat, and his instinct is to eliminate it, all out of a fierce love for his faith and his people.
But where Omar saw the crime, the prophet saw the person. His response wasn't anger, it was this incredible, profound mercy. He didn't downplay what Khattab did, but then he did something amazing. He reminded everyone of Khattab's past, of his sacrifice at Badr. It was a powerful lesson that a person's entire history counts, and that divine mercy can see past one awful mistake.
You know, this moment was basically a masterclass for Umar. He learned so much so fast. He saw that a huge sin doesn't automatically cancel out someone's faith. He understood that while his own anger came from a good place, from taking his religion seriously, true strength was in submitting that anger to a higher wisdom. And you see his transformation happen in real time. The second he heard the prophet's reasoning, his fire just cooled. He started learning that critical skill of balancing a person's good deeds against a terrible mistake.
Now, let's talk about another one of Umar's defining traits. His absolute rock-solid reliability when everything was falling apart. In moments of pure chaos, when others wavered or ran, Umar was the one you could count on to stand firm.
Let's look at 2 key moments. At the Battle of Hunayn, the Muslim army gets ambushed, and chaos breaks out. Many soldiers fled in panic. But Omar? He was one of the few who stood his ground, right there beside the Prophet. That's courage. Then, fast forward to the difficult campaign of Tabook. The army is exhausted, starving, and what does Omar do? He donates half of everything he owns to the cause. His commitment wasn't just words, it was action, again and again.
But his education was an ongoing process. Even after all this, that protective zeal could still flare up.
When a man publicly questioned the Prophet's fairness after that same battle, Umar's gut reaction was, again, to deal with the threat permanently. And once more, the Prophet stepped in, not to excuse the man's disrespect, but to teach an even deeper lesson about patience and the restraint a true leader needs.
All of these moments where he's guided and corrected, they all point to another side of his personality, one that's maybe not as famous. Umar wasn't just a warrior. At his core, he was a deeply committed student. His incredible strength was matched by an equally incredible thirst for knowledge, and he knew exactly where to find it.
He was famous for this. Whenever the Prophet, peace be upon him, held a gathering to teach, Umar would be there. He wasn't a passive listener either. He'd ask questions, he'd seek clarification, and he would not leave until he felt he truly understood. That shows a kind of humility and hunger for learning that was just as intense as his zeal.
Probably the most amazing example of this is the famous hadith of Jibreel. Omar was right there when it happened. A stranger, dressed in spotless white clothes, appeared out of nowhere, sat down with the Prophet, and started asking these huge fundamental questions. What is Islam? Submission through our actions. What is Iman? Faith in our hearts. And what is Ihsan? The highest level, to worship God as though you can see Him.
And after this mysterious stranger left, the Prophet turned to Omar, who must have been just stunned, and he revealed who it was. That was no ordinary man. That was the Archangel Gabriel, Jibreel himself, who had come in human form to teach them the very core of their religion. Omar had just sat through a lesson delivered from the heavens.
So, when you bring all these pieces together, you start to see his ultimate legacy. The story of Umar is really a story of transformation. It's about how this incredibly powerful raw zeal was carefully shaped by divine revelation into a deep and lasting wisdom. And this right here, this comparison, it just perfectly captures his whole journey. On one side, you have his raw initial instinct, let me strike his neck. It's a reaction that comes from a place of deep protective love. But over the years, through constant learning, that was transformed into a new default response. Allah and His Messenger know best. And that is the ultimate submission to a wisdom greater than his own.
And really, this is the main takeaway. Omar's legendary strength wasn't just his physical power or his iron will. His true, lasting strength, the thing that made him such a remarkable leader, was his willingness to humble that will, to channel that passion, and to completely submit to the guidance and the light of revelation.
So, his story leaves us with this huge question to think about. What does it really mean when our greatest personal strengths, our passion, our willpower, our drive, are shaped and guided not by our own ego, but by a faith that is even stronger? What is a person truly capable of then?